The desert sun blazed mercilessly over Fallujah, as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her body armor for what felt like the 100th time that morning. The Iraqi city stretched before her team like a maze of concrete and danger, its streets empty except for the occasional stray dog picking through rubble. Maria had been in Iraq for 8 months now, leading convoy security missions that transported supplies between military bases. At 28 years old, she was one of the few female soldiers in her unit, but she had earned respect through her steady nerves and quick thinking under pressure. The mission briefing that morning had been routine. Intelligence suggested the route was relatively clear, with only minor threats reported in the past week. Maria's team would escort 3 supply trucks carrying medical equipment and food rations to a forward operating base on the outskirts of Fallujah. The convoy consisted of 2 armored Humvees with Maria's team providing security, while the supply trucks rolled between them like precious cargo wrapped in steel. Maria checked her weapon one final time as she climbed into the lead vehicle. Her M4 carbine was clean and ready, magazines loaded and secured to her vest. She had learned early in her deployment that preparation could mean the difference between coming home and becoming a statistic. The other soldiers in her vehicle were equally focused. Corporal Johnson, barely 21 years old, manned the machine gun mounted on top. Specialist Williams drove with the concentration of someone who knew that every pothole could hide an improvised explosive device. The convoy rolled out of the base at exactly 0800 hours. The morning air was already thick with heat and dust, and Maria felt sweat beginning to form under her helmet. Radio chatter crackled through her headset as various units across the region reported their positions and status updates. Everything seemed normal, almost peaceful in the way that combat zones sometimes felt during quiet moments. As they moved through the outskirts of Fallujah, Maria studied the landscape through her window. Abandoned buildings lined the road, their walls pocked with bullet holes from previous battles. Children occasionally appeared in doorways, watching the American convoy pass with curious eyes before disappearing back into the shadows. Local men gathered in small groups, their conversations stopping as the military vehicles approached. The first 20 minutes of the journey passed without incident. Maria allowed herself to relax slightly, thinking about the letter she had received from her sister the previous day. Her niece had lost her first tooth, and her sister had described the elaborate ritual the tooth fairy had performed. These small connections to home helped Maria remember why she was fighting, what she was protecting thousands of miles away from this desert battlefield. Radio communication with the base remained clear and steady. The route they were taking had been used dozens of times before, and local military intelligence had not reported any significant enemy activity in the area for several days. The supply trucks maintained their position in the convoy, their drivers experienced veterans who knew how to navigate the dangerous roads of Iraq. Maria's attention was drawn to a cluster of buildings ahead, where the road narrowed slightly. Standard protocol required heightened awareness at such choke points, where enemy forces often positioned ambushes. She instructed Corporal Johnson to scan the rooftops carefully while Specialist Williams reduced speed to maintain better control of the vehicle. The landscape around them told the story of a city that had seen too much conflict. Burned-out cars sat abandoned along the roadside, their metal frames twisted by explosions. Palm trees that had once provided shade now stood as blackened skeletons against the bright blue sky. The infrastructure showed signs of repeated damage and hasty repairs, evidence of the ongoing struggle for control of this strategic city. As they approached the narrow section of road, Maria noticed that the usual background noise of the city had faded. No children played in the streets, no vendors called out their wares, no normal sounds of daily life echoed from the buildings. The silence felt heavy and unnatural, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Her radio crackled with a routine check-in from the base. All units were reporting normal status, and weather conditions remained clear for air support if needed. The convoy maintained its steady pace, following protocols that had been drilled into every soldier countless times during training exercises back in the United States. Maria thought about her training at Fort Bragg, where she had learned to read the subtle signs that often preceded enemy contact. Her instructors had emphasized trusting instincts, paying attention to environmental changes, and maintaining constant communication with team members. Those lessons had kept her alive through multiple deployments. and she relied on them now as they moved deeper into potentially hostile territory. The buildings on either side of the road seemed to lean in slightly, creating shadows that could hide enemy fighters or weapons caches. Maria's eyes moved constantly, scanning windows, doorways, and rooftops for any sign of movement or unusual activity. Her finger rested near the safety of her weapon, ready to engage if necessary. Behind them, the supply trucks maintained their position in the convoy formation. Their cargo was desperately needed at the forward operating base, where medical supplies were running low and food rations were nearly exhausted. The success of this mission would directly impact the welfare of fellow soldiers who depended on these regular supply runs for their survival and effectiveness. The heat continued to build as the morning progressed, and Maria could feel perspiration gathering under her body armor. The weight of her equipment pressed down on her shoulders, but years of training had conditioned her body to handle the physical demands of combat operations. Her mind remained focused on the mission and the safety of her team. As they prepared to enter the most dangerous section of their route, Maria performed one final radio check with all elements of the convoy. Each vehicle reported ready status. Weapon systems were operational and communication links remained strong. Everything appeared normal as they moved forward into what would become the most challenging fight of Maria's military career, though she could not yet know that the next few minutes would test every skill she had learned and every ounce of courage she possessed. The first shot came from a rooftop 200 meters ahead, striking the front windshield of Maria's Humvee with a sharp crack that spiderwebbed the armored glass. Specialist Williams immediately swerved the vehicle toward cover, while Corporal Johnson swung the mounted machine gun toward the source of fire. Within seconds, the peaceful morning erupted into chaos as enemy fighters emerged from concealed positions. Throughout the narrow urban corridor, Maria's training kicked in automatically as she grabbed her radio and called for immediate support. "Base, this is Convoy 7 Alpha. We are taking effective enemy fire from multiple positions, requesting immediate air support and quick reaction force." Her voice remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Around her, the rest of the convoy was reacting to the ambush with practiced efficiency. Muzzle flashes appeared from windows and doorways on both sides of the street as insurgent fighters opened fire with assault rifles and rocket-propelled grenades. The distinctive crack of AK-47 rounds mixed with the deeper boom of RPGs as the enemy attempted to destroy the convoy vehicles and eliminate the American soldiers. Maria could see that this was a well-planned ambush, with enemy positions carefully coordinated to create overlapping fields of fire. The rear Humvee in the convoy immediately moved to provide covering fire while the supply trucks sought whatever protection they could find behind concrete barriers and abandoned vehicles. Radio chatter filled Maria's headset as various units reported their status and requested ammunition resupply. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed off the surrounding buildings, creating a deafening wall of noise. Maria exited her vehicle and took position behind the engine block, using the armor plating for protection while returning fire at enemy positions. Her M4 carbine felt familiar and reassuring in her hands as she acquired targets and engaged insurgent fighters. Years of marksmanship training guided her movements as she aimed carefully and squeezed the trigger with controlled precision. An RPG streaked past her position, missing by mere feet before exploding against a concrete wall behind the convoy. The blast sent chunks of debris flying through the air, and Maria felt fragments strike her body armor. She could taste dust and cordite in the air as smoke began to obscure visibility across the battlefield. Corporal Johnson's machine gun chattered overhead, sending long bursts toward enemy positions on the rooftops. His fire was accurate and disciplined, forcing insurgent fighters to take cover and disrupting their ability to coordinate their attack. Brass casings rained down around Maria's position as Johnson maintained sustained fire against multiple targets. The intensity of the firefight continued to escalate as more enemy fighters joined the battle. Maria could see muzzle flashes from at least 8 different positions, indicating that her convoy had driven into a significant enemy force. The insurgents were using the urban terrain to their advantage, moving between buildings and using civilian structures for cover and concealment. Despite the overwhelming enemy fire, Maria's team maintained their discipline and continued to fight back effectively. Their superior training and equipment began to show results as enemy fire decreased from several positions. The convoy's defensive formation held together even under intense pressure, with each vehicle providing mutual support to the others. Maria noticed that one of the supply truck drivers had been wounded and was struggling to maintain control of his vehicle. She made the decision to move to his position, crossing 30 meters of open ground under enemy fire. Bullets snapped past her head as she sprinted between cover points, finally reaching the wounded driver's position. The driver had taken a bullet in his shoulder, but was still conscious and able to speak. Maria quickly applied a pressure bandage to stop the bleeding, while coordinating with her team to maintain defensive fire. The wounded soldier's truck contained critical medical supplies that could not be lost, making his rescue a priority for the entire mission. As Maria worked to stabilize the wounded driver, she heard the distinctive whistle of incoming mortar rounds. The enemy had escalated their attack to include indirect fire weapons, significantly increasing the danger to the convoy. She shouted a warning to her team just before the first mortar exploded 50 meters away, sending a shower of dirt and concrete fragments across their position. The mortar attack forced the convoy to adjust their defensive positions while maintaining fire against enemy fighters. Maria helped move the wounded driver to better cover before returning to her fighting position. Her body armor had already stopped several bullet fragments, and she could feel the weight of the impacts against the ceramic plates that protected her vital organs. Radio communication with the base continued as Maria provided updates on the tactical situation. Air support was still several minutes away, and the quick reaction force was en route but would need time to reach their position. Until then, the convoy would have to hold their ground against a determined enemy force that seemed to have unlimited ammunition. The firefight had now lasted for over 20 minutes, with no sign that the enemy was willing to break contact. Maria realized that this was not a simple harassment attack, but a serious attempt to destroy the convoy and capture or kill all American personnel. The insurgents were well equipped and showed tactical sophistication in their coordination and use of terrain. Despite the intensity of the battle, Maria's team continued to fight with remarkable effectiveness. Their fire discipline prevented them from wasting ammunition, while ensuring that every enemy position received accurate return fire. The convoy's defensive perimeter held firm, even as enemy fighters attempted to flank their positions. As the sound of aircraft engines became audible in the distance, Maria felt a surge of hope that air support would soon arrive to tip the balance of the battle. However, she also knew that the next few minutes would be critical as the enemy would likely increase their efforts to overrun the convoy before American reinforcements could arrive. The battle for survival in the streets of Fallujah was far from over. The enemy's tactics suddenly shifted as insurgent fighters began moving closer to the convoy's position, using the cover of smoke and debris to advance under the protection of sustained covering fire. Maria could see armed figures darting between buildings, attempting to close the distance for a final assault on the American position. The situation was becoming increasingly desperate as ammunition supplies began to run low and several team members had sustained wounds. Maria made a critical decision to reposition her team to a more defensible location near a partially destroyed building that would provide better protection from the mortar attacks. She coordinated the movement over her radio while maintaining suppressive fire against enemy positions. The wounded truck driver was carefully moved by 2 soldiers while Maria provided covering fire, her rifle barrel growing hot from continuous use. As her team established their new position, Maria conducted a quick assessment of their tactical situation. 3 soldiers had been wounded, though all remained capable of fighting. Ammunition was becoming a serious concern, with each team member down to their last few magazines. The enemy seemed to have an endless supply of fighters and weapons, suggesting this was a major planned operation, rather than an opportunistic attack. The sound of jet engines overhead brought temporary relief as an F-16 fighter aircraft arrived to provide close air support. Maria quickly established radio contact with the pilot and began directing airstrikes against enemy positions that posed the greatest threat to the convoy. The precision munitions delivered by the aircraft temporarily suppressed enemy fire and bought valuable time for the ground forces. However, the insurgents demonstrated their tactical flexibility by quickly adapting to the air threat. They dispersed into smaller groups and moved into buildings where the aircraft could not effectively engage them without risking civilian casualties. Within minutes of the airstrike, enemy fire resumed from new positions, forcing Maria's team to continue their ground fight without decisive air support. During a brief lull in the fighting, Maria noticed that Corporal Johnson had been hit by enemy fire. The young soldier was still conscious but had taken a bullet in his leg that was bleeding heavily. She immediately moved to his position to provide medical assistance, applying a tourniquet while enemy bullets continued to impact around their location. The weight of command responsibility pressed heavily on Maria as she realized that the survival of her entire team now depended on her decisions. With several wounded soldiers and dwindling ammunition, she had to balance the need to continue fighting against the possibility of attempting a tactical withdrawal. However, the supply trucks could not be abandoned, as their cargo was desperately needed by other American forces. Maria's radio crackled with an update from the Quick Reaction Force, which was still 15 minutes away from their position. The enemy seemed to sense that time was working against the convoy and increased the intensity of their assault. RPG rounds began impacting closer to the American position, and the insurgent fighters showed increasing boldness in their movements. In a moment that would later be remembered by all who witnessed it, Maria made the decision to single-handedly assault the enemy position that posed the greatest threat to her team. Armed with her rifle and the last of her hand grenades, she moved across 50 meters of open ground while under intense enemy fire. Her teammates provided covering fire as she advanced toward a building from which heavy machine gun fire was decimating their position. The first bullet struck Maria in her left shoulder, spinning her around but not stopping her advance. The ceramic plates in her body armor absorbed the impact of 2 more rounds that would have been fatal without protection. She continued moving forward, her training and determination overriding the pain and shock of being wounded in combat. A second bullet caught Maria in her right thigh, causing her to stumble but not fall. Blood began seeping through her uniform, but adrenaline and years of physical conditioning kept her moving toward the enemy position. Her teammates watched in amazement as she continued her assault, despite being wounded multiple times. As Maria reached the building containing the enemy machine gun position, she was struck again, this time in her left arm. The impact nearly caused her to drop her rifle, but she managed to maintain her grip on the weapon while throwing a grenade through the window from which the enemy fire was originating. The explosion temporarily silenced the machine gun and eliminated several insurgent fighters. Maria used the momentary confusion to enter the building and clear the remaining enemy fighters at close range. Her rifle work was precise and deadly as she moved through the structure, eliminating threats while searching for additional enemy positions. Despite her wounds, her military training allowed her to maintain tactical awareness and continue fighting effectively. The elimination of the enemy machine gun position significantly reduced the threat to Maria's convoy and allowed her team to consolidate their defensive position. However, enemy fire continued from multiple other locations, and Maria realized that the battle was far from over. She had bought time and space for her team, but more fighting would be required before they could claim victory. As Maria attempted to return to her team's position, she was struck by 2 more bullets in quick succession. One round hit her in the back, stopped by her body armor but delivering a tremendous impact that knocked her to the ground. The second bullet caught her in her right arm, causing significant bleeding and limiting her ability to operate her weapon effectively. Despite her mounting wounds, Maria continued to fight from her new position inside the building. She had a clear view of several enemy positions from her location, and used her remaining ammunition to engage targets that threatened her team. Her radio remained functional, allowing her to coordinate with her teammates and direct their fire against priority targets. The sound of helicopter rotors became audible in the distance, indicating that additional support was finally arriving. Maria knew that she had to continue fighting to protect her team until reinforcements could reach their position. Every minute of resistance brought them closer to survival, but the cost in blood and ammunition continued to mount as the battle raged through the streets of Fallujah. The pain from Maria's multiple wounds began to intensify as adrenaline started to wear off, but she forced herself to maintain focus on the battle. Blood loss was becoming a serious concern, with dark stains spreading across her uniform from at least 6 separate bullet wounds. Her left arm hung nearly useless at her side, but she managed to operate her rifle one-handed while using the building's walls for support. From her position inside the captured building, Maria had a commanding view of the battlefield and could see enemy fighters attempting to regroup for another assault on her convoy. She called out target information to her team over the radio, directing their fire toward the most dangerous threats. Her voice remained steady despite her injuries, providing crucial battlefield intelligence that helped her teammates survive. The helicopter sounds grew louder as a pair of Apache attack helicopters approached the battlefield. Maria established radio contact with the lead pilot and began directing helicopter gun runs against enemy positions that were beyond the range of her ground team's weapons. The devastating firepower of the attack helicopters began to turn the tide of the battle, forcing enemy fighters to seek deeper cover. However, the insurgents still possessed portable anti-aircraft missiles and managed to force the helicopters to maintain greater distance from the battlefield. This reduced the effectiveness of air support, while allowing enemy fighters to continue their assault on the convoy. Maria realized that the ground fight would continue despite the arrival of air assets. A seventh bullet struck Maria in her lower back, penetrating a gap in her body armor and causing severe pain that nearly caused her to lose consciousness. She bit down hard on her lip to stay alert, tasting blood as she fought to maintain awareness of the tactical situation. The wound was serious, but she knew that abandoning her position would likely result in the death of her entire team. Enemy fighters had begun using the city's sewer system to move undetected between buildings, emerging suddenly to fire at the convoy before disappearing back underground. Maria spotted this tactic and alerted her team, allowing them to prepare for the unexpected attacks. Her tactical awareness remained sharp despite her physical condition deteriorating rapidly. The eighth wound came from an enemy sniper who had positioned himself in a building several hundred meters away. The bullet struck Maria in her right shoulder, destroying muscle and bone while sending shockwaves of pain throughout her body. She nearly dropped her rifle but managed to maintain her grip while seeking better cover within the building. Maria's radio communications with her team became increasingly important as her physical ability to fight diminished. She coordinated ammunition redistribution between team members and directed the positioning of the wounded truck driver to a more secure location. Her leadership held the convoy together, even as enemy pressure continued to mount. The sound of tracked vehicles approaching from the east indicated that the quick reaction force was finally nearing the battlefield. Maria passed this information to her team while engaging an enemy fighter who had appeared in a window across the street. Her shot was accurate despite her wounds, eliminating the threat and protecting her teammates below. A ninth bullet caught Maria in her left leg, shattering bone and causing her to collapse against the wall of the building. Blood loss was now becoming critical, and she could feel her strength ebbing with each passing minute. However, she maintained her fighting position and continued to engage enemy targets that threatened her convoy. The insurgents seemed to realize that American reinforcements were approaching and began to intensify their assault in an attempt to overrun the convoy before help arrived. RPG rounds impacted closer to Maria's building, and enemy fighters showed increasing desperation in their attacks. The next few minutes would determine whether the convoy survived or was completely destroyed. Despite her failing physical condition, Maria managed to throw her last grenade at a group of enemy fighters who were attempting to advance on her team's position. The explosion eliminated 3 insurgents and forced others to seek cover, buying precious time for the quick reaction force to arrive. Her tactical decisions continued to save lives even as her own situation became increasingly dire. The 10th bullet struck Maria in her abdomen, causing massive internal bleeding and pain that threatened to overwhelm her consciousness. She pressed her hand against the wound to slow the bleeding while maintaining her grip on her rifle with her remaining functional arm. The taste of copper filled her mouth as blood loss began to affect her vital signs. Maria's teammates below were unaware of the full extent of her injuries, but could hear the strain in her voice over the radio. She continued to provide target information and coordinate their defensive efforts while fighting to remain conscious. Her determination to protect her team overrode the body's natural response to massive trauma and blood loss. The sound of Bradley fighting vehicles could now be heard approaching the battle area, their powerful engines and track noise indicating that heavy reinforcements were finally arriving. Maria knew that she had to hold her position for just a few more minutes to ensure her team's survival. The enemy was running out of time to complete their assault. An 11th and final bullet struck Maria in her chest, penetrating between the ceramic plates of her body armor and causing a wound that would have been immediately fatal to most people. However, her exceptional physical condition and mental toughness allowed her to remain conscious and continue fighting. She adjusted her position against the wall and prepared to engage any enemy fighters who threatened her team, during the final moments before reinforcements arrived. The battle had now lasted over an hour, with Maria sustaining 11 separate gunshot wounds, while continuing to fight effectively against a determined enemy force. Her actions had saved the lives of every member of her convoy, and preserved critical supplies needed by other American forces. As the Quick Reaction Force prepared to enter the battlefield, Maria maintained her vigil from the captured building, ready to continue fighting until the last enemy fighter was eliminated or driven from the area. The rumble of Bradley fighting vehicles grew louder as the Quick Reaction Force finally reached the outskirts of the battle area. Maria could see dust clouds rising from their approach through the broken window of her defensive position. Despite 11 gunshot wounds and massive blood loss, she maintained her vigilance, scanning for enemy fighters who might attempt last-minute attacks. On her convoy, before the reinforcements could secure the area, radio chatter increased dramatically as the Quick Reaction Force coordinated with Maria's embattled convoy. The force commander requested a situation report, and Maria provided a detailed briefing on enemy positions, friendly casualties, and ammunition status. Her voice was noticeably weaker but remained professional and accurate, demonstrating remarkable mental clarity despite her physical trauma. The lead Bradley fighting vehicle rounded the corner and immediately engaged enemy positions with its 25mm chain gun. The devastating firepower of the armored vehicle's weapon system quickly suppressed insurgent fighters who had been maintaining pressure on Maria's convoy. Secondary explosions erupted from several buildings as enemy ammunition supplies were hit by the precise fire. Navy SEALs who had accompanied the Quick Reaction Force began dismounting from their vehicles and moving toward the convoy's position. These elite special operations forces were equipped with advanced medical equipment and had extensive training in combat casualty care. Their arrival marked the beginning of the end of the desperate battle that had raged for over an hour. Maria watched from her elevated position as SEAL team members efficiently moved through the battlefield, clearing buildings and securing the area around the convoy. Their professional competence and advanced equipment quickly established control over the tactical situation. Enemy fighters began withdrawing from the area rather than face the overwhelming firepower of the combined American forces. As the immediate threat diminished, Maria attempted to stand and rejoin her team, but found that her legs would no longer support her weight. The cumulative effect of her wounds had finally overwhelmed her physical reserves, and she collapsed against the wall of the building. Blood loss had reached critical levels, and her vision began to blur as shock set in. One of the SEAL medics had been monitoring radio communications and realized that Maria was still in the building where the heaviest fighting had occurred. He immediately moved toward her position, accompanied by another team member who provided security during the approach. Their movement was swift and professional, demonstrating the tactical expertise that made SEALs legendary among military forces. The medic found Maria slumped against the wall but still conscious and alert. Her rifle remained ready in her hands, and her eyes continued to scan for threats even though her body had reached the limits of human endurance. The SEAL was amazed to find her alive and functional after sustaining such massive trauma during the prolonged firefight. Initial medical assessment revealed the extent of Maria's injuries, with 11 separate gunshot wounds distributed across her body. Several wounds had penetrated muscle and bone, while others had been stopped by her body armor. The medic immediately began advanced trauma care, establishing intravenous access and administering blood products to combat the severe blood loss. Despite her critical condition, Maria continued to provide intelligence about enemy positions and tactics to the SEAL team. Her information proved valuable in planning the final clearing operations that would secure the entire battle area. The team leader was impressed by her tactical awareness and professional competence, even while facing life-threatening injuries. The SEAL medic worked with practiced efficiency to stabilize Maria's condition for evacuation. Advanced medical equipment allowed him to address multiple wounds simultaneously while monitoring her vital signs and blood pressure. His training in combat medicine proved crucial in keeping Maria alive during the critical first minutes of treatment. Additional medical personnel arrived from the Quick Reaction Force, including a flight medic who would accompany Maria during helicopter evacuation to a military hospital. The coordination between different medical specialists demonstrated the sophisticated casualty care system that saved countless lives during military operations. In Iraq, a medevac helicopter was already en route to the battlefield, its crew having been alerted during the initial phases of the firefight. The aircraft's medical team was prepared for multiple casualties and had sufficient blood products and equipment to handle the most severe trauma cases. Their rapid response capability was essential for saving lives in remote combat areas. While medical personnel worked to stabilize Maria's condition, other members of the SEAL team continued clearing operations throughout the battlefield. They recovered enemy weapons and intelligence materials that would prove valuable for future operations. The thoroughness of their post-combat procedures reflected the professional standards that characterize special operations forces. Maria's convoy team members were finally able to approach her position as the area was declared secure. They were shocked by the extent of her injuries but amazed that she had continued fighting effectively throughout the engagement. Her actions had undoubtedly saved their lives, and they expressed their gratitude despite her weakened condition. The wounded truck driver whom Maria had rescued early in the battle was among those who came to see her before the helicopter evacuation. His shoulder wound had been treated and stabilized, and he credited Maria with saving his life during the most dangerous phase of the firefight. His supplies had been preserved and would reach the forward operating base as originally planned. As the medevac helicopter approached the landing zone, SEAL team members prepared Maria for transport. Advanced medical interventions had stabilized her condition enough for the flight to the hospital, but her survival remained uncertain given the severity of her wounds. The helicopter's medical team took over her care as she was loaded aboard the aircraft. The battlefield fell quiet as the last enemy fighters withdrew from the area and the convoy prepared to continue its mission. Maria's extraordinary courage and tactical skill had turned what could have been a devastating defeat into a hard-fought victory. Her example would be remembered and honored by every soldier who learned of her actions in the streets of Fallujah. The medevac helicopter lifted off from the dusty landing zone with Maria stabilized, but still fighting for her life inside the aircraft's medical bay. The flight medic continued advanced trauma care during the 20-minute flight to the military hospital, monitoring her vital signs while administering blood products and medications to combat shock. The helicopter's crew had seen many wounded soldiers, but Maria's case stood out for both the severity of her injuries and her remarkable survival. At the military hospital, a trauma team was already prepared and waiting when the helicopter touched down. Maria was immediately transferred to the emergency room, where military surgeons began the complex process of treating 11 gunshot wounds. The medical team worked for over 8 hours to repair damaged organs, reconstruct shattered bones, and address internal bleeding that threatened her life. During the following days, Maria drifted in and out of consciousness as her body began the slow process of healing. Military medical personnel provided round-the-clock care, monitoring for complications while gradually reducing life support systems as her condition stabilized. Her family was notified and began the journey to Iraq to be at her bedside during the critical recovery. Period news of Maria's heroic actions spread quickly through military channels as the SEAL team filed their after-action reports. The detailed accounts of her courage under fire and tactical leadership during the extended firefight impressed senior military commanders who recognized the exceptional nature of her performance. Her actions had saved multiple lives and preserved critical military supplies during a major enemy assault. The convoy mission was eventually completed successfully, with the medical supplies and food rations reaching the forward operating base, where they were desperately needed. The soldiers at that remote outpost would never know that their survival depended on Maria's courage during the battle in Fallujah. Her sacrifice had ripple effects throughout the military community in Iraq. Intelligence analysts studied the enemy tactics and equipment, recovered from the battlefield to better understand insurgent capabilities and planning. The sophistication of the ambush suggested significant enemy resources and coordination, making Maria's successful defense even more remarkable. The information gathered would help protect future convoys traveling through similar dangerous areas. Military investigators interviewed every member of Maria's team to document the complete sequence of events during the firefight. Their testimonies painted a picture of extraordinary leadership and tactical skill under the most challenging combat conditions. The official reports would later be used to support recommendations for military decorations and commendations. As Maria slowly regained consciousness, she learned about the successful completion of her mission and the survival of all team members under her command. The knowledge that her actions had achieved their intended purpose provided important psychological support during the difficult recovery process. Her sense of duty and responsibility had been fulfilled despite the enormous personal cost. Physical rehabilitation began slowly as Maria's wounds healed sufficiently to allow limited movement and exercise. Military physical therapists worked with her to regain strength and mobility in areas affected by her injuries. The process was painful and exhausting, but Maria approached it with the same determination she had shown during combat. The SEAL team that had rescued Maria visited her during her recovery, bringing photographs and updates from the battlefield where she had fought so courageously. Their respect and admiration for her actions was evident, and they shared stories of how her tactical intelligence had helped them complete their clearing operations. These visits provided important encouragement during difficult moments in her recovery. Military psychiatrists also worked with Maria to address the psychological impact of her combat experience and severe injuries. Post-traumatic stress was a common concern for soldiers who had survived intense firefights, and professional counseling helped her process the events and emotions associated with the battle. Mental health support was considered as important as physical rehabilitation. Maria's family arrived and provided crucial emotional support during the long recovery process. Their presence reminded her of the life waiting for her back home and the importance of focusing on healing rather than dwelling on the traumatic events in Fallujah. Family support was often the most important factor in successful recovery from combat injuries. After several months of intensive medical care and rehabilitation, Maria was medically evacuated to military hospitals in the United States for continued treatment. The transition from combat zone to home country marked an important milestone in her recovery, though significant challenges remained. Advanced medical facilities would provide specialized care for her complex injuries. The military awards and decorations process moved forward as Maria's actions were formally recognized through official channels. Her heroism had been witnessed by multiple soldiers and documented in detailed reports that supported the highest levels of recognition. The decorations would acknowledge both her tactical excellence and personal courage under fire. Physical therapy continued at military medical facilities near Maria's home, allowing her family to participate more actively in her recovery. Gradual improvement in strength and mobility provided hope for eventual return to normal activities, though full recovery would take many more months of dedicated effort. Her determination remained as strong as it had been during combat. Maria's story began to spread beyond military circles as journalists learned about her remarkable survival and heroic actions. Media coverage brought public attention to the sacrifices made by military personnel in Iraq and highlighted the exceptional courage displayed by individual soldiers like Maria. Her example inspired others facing their own challenges and difficulties. The convoy route through Fallujah was eventually secured through continued military operations that built upon the intelligence gathered during Maria's battle. Her sacrifice had contributed to broader strategic success in the region, demonstrating how individual acts of courage could have lasting impact on military operations. The road became safer for future supply missions. Years later, Maria would be invited to speak at military academies and training facilities, sharing her experiences with new generations of soldiers. Her story became part of military education, teaching future leaders about courage, leadership, and tactical decision-making under pressure. Her legacy continued to serve her country long after her recovery was complete.